Hello and welcome to the Blackout Podcast, where I get to talk to amazing people who do amazing things. And today I have the creative director of JCK Media and Design, Patricia Chareka. Thank you so much for coming to the Blackout today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, man, where to start? Like, I have so many things I want to hit, but I kind of like going way back, right? How did you get to be the creative director of JCK? Like, what was the beginning of the genesis of that journey?
Okay. So let's see if I can make this concise because it feels like it's been such a long journey.
Right.
So essentially, when I was in university, I had initially pursued a Bachelor of Commerce. I was going to do accounting. Everyone said, that'll probably yield the best career for you.
Yes, it does. See, if you're an accountant, you'll have a job
You'll
for life.
always have a job. Exactly.
But I can't fucking stand it.
Not something that it was after I got my first co-op and I really got to have that position for a while and experience what it was like that I realized, as wonderful as it is that I like accounting, this isn't something that I could see myself doing long term. So at that time, I had been trying to explore other opportunities and I had the opportunity to get a position as a creative executive assistant for a realtor who also worked as a brand and marketing specialist for a home building company. So when I got that position with her, it was during the summer times, and that's when I got exposed to branding and marketing work. And because she worked with new development homes, we also got to do a little bit of videography and real estate photography. So then that's when I was given a camera for the first time and I really got to play with that. And then subsequently, part of the position also entailed getting to work with the company on revamping their website. So at the time, they had somebody else who was doing it not in-house. And I had recently started my little stint of being an influencer when Instagram had kind of blown up. So I had decided to start my own blog. And then that's when I realized, okay, web design, this is something I kind of have an interest in. And then I, was doing a little bit more digging, let me learn a little bit more on the coding side. That way it's not just visual, but I don't know, I'm an inquisitive person and I always want to know how things work. So when I was working with this company, because now I had this experience with a little bit of web design, I said, well, right now it's costing you X amount of dollars. This is what we could save if you just did it in-house. And I, had a successful pitch while I was assuming that position and I was able to help with their website. And so now I'm helping with the website. I am helping with videography, photography. And during that same period, the Halifax Shopping Center here in Halifax had kind of seen, my photography on my Instagram, again, with the whole influencer vibe I was going for. And they reached out to me and they said, Patricia, we'd love to give you a gift card so you can keep shopping and showing your style online. And so I thought to myself, so that clearly means that managing my own social media, I'm doing a good job with that. So then I pieced it all together and I realized, okay, photography, videography, something that clearly was natural to me after I got to hold that camera, web design, social media management and curation, and kind of knowing how to piece things together in a way that was aesthetically pleasing was something that I guess just had a natural eye for. So then I decided to brand myself as a digital media specialist. And so the woman that I was working for was having a wedding and she had gone over her budget. So because I had worked with different cameras, working with her, she said, well, a wedding is not real estate videography, but let's see what you can do because I don't have a budget for a videographer. So you can just film it and we'll see what happens. And then I decided that for her wedding gift, I wanted to piece the video together and give that to her as her wedding video. So then that's when I really got to start editing something that had a little bit more of a narrative, right? Because you're showing the whole sequence of the wedding, but in a way that also has to be visually, interesting, right? She posted that on Facebook. Couple people messaged, who was your videographer? I'd like to hire them. So then I realized, okay, digital media specialist, and really pursuing all of these creative avenues that I otherwise wouldn't have done if I had stayed working as an accountant, is something that I decided, okay, I really want to do this. And then after I started looking, at how much money had come in while it was a side hustle, I thought to myself, wait, if I just work a little bit harder, this could become a full-time thing. So then I was Patricia Chareka, digital media specialist, and then I went full-time doing that. And then I rebranded because I had two gentlemen who had always been my biggest supporters who really pushed me to go full-time. And their last names were Johnson and Knutson. So that is how JCK was born, because it now stands for Johnson, Chareka, and Knutson. I wanted to pay homage to the people that had really supported me, because anytime someone wants to start a new business, it's always, this is risky. And sometimes you have a lot of people who, don't do that. That's not the safest bet. But it was nice to have, these people really want to support me.
Right.
So then JCK was born. And then I changed my title to creative director, because I started realizing that people, whether they're doing web design or social media, the direction of what do we need to be doing and how can we execute, and implementation and the strategy was something that was missing. So then I was able to offer creativity, but also direction. So then creative director for the company is the role that I assumed, and I have been doing that for going on 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that was pretty succinct. It took like years. I'm putting it into
nice.
just a
Okay.
couple.
Tried to make it that way.
You
Sometimes
did.
I ramble. So.
But okay, so let's rewind a bit.
Yes.
Was it ever scary deciding to go full time?
Every single day I wake up, it's scary, right? Especially now that we're, post pandemic. And having gone through navigating a small business during an economic downturn that nobody could have predicted, you always question, why do I have my own business? Why am I doing this? So in the beginning, it was definitely very scary, and it's still scary every day, because if you don't put in the effort and the time, you don't get the paycheck, right? It's not like I can show up, punch in, do my 9 to 5, and then I know I have a paycheck. It's like
It's confirmed every 2 weeks.
Exactly. You constantly have to be prospecting. You have to manage your cash flow wisely, especially when you know that you're going to have those months where, things are going to slow down a little bit.
Right.
And then now also last year was my first time bringing on a full-time employee. So that was it was the first time I felt like an adult, right? Having to issue ROEs.
I think you've been an adult for a very long time.
Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but when you have an employee, and I remember, issuing her T4, I thought to myself, wow, I've done something mature here. I think I'm a real business now.
Right.
So it's scary every day, because, even then I'm thinking, am I doing this right? Want to make sure that I'm, CRA, everything's approved. So I think there's never a moment where it's not scary, but I like the excitement. And I think anyone who, wants to be an entrepreneur, that love of risk, I think, is one of the reasons why it works well for me, right? Because we're the kinds of people who, there's a challenge, but I like that challenge, and I want to keep seeing if it's something I can do. And fortunately for me, I work in digital media, which again, with the pandemic, a lot of people transitioning online has worked out well. So that's a little bit about how I've navigated that.
One thing that has been a steady thread in this, you talking so far has been creative. I like, that's the name on the plate, creative director, right? But you went down the line of accounting. Like, was there ever a creative side to you growing up?
Back in grade 8, I remember there was an assembly, and I got called up because I had won an award. And I was thinking to myself, what's this award for? A couple months before, I had entered a contest, and it was, you had to draw a piece and submit it for MAD, Mothers Against Drinking and Driving. And so you had to come up with a creative concept for how you wanted to depict that. And I had drawn something, and I remember being chosen, and the prize was $150. I got called up in an assembly, got my picture taken. I was in the paper. I was like, oh, this is so exciting. And I say that story because, yes, when I was younger, I used to paint and I used to draw quite a bit. I still do portraits every now and then, just sketching. So I've always been someone who visually, I've always had an interest in being creative. And I'm also the kind of person who thinks very, in a very abstract way, right? I'm always thinking, okay, this is one way of doing it, but maybe there's this other completely different way of thinking outside of the box. So I think I've always been a creative person. Even when I had the accounting co-op position, they brought me on to do some of their marketing. Because while I was there, I was looking at some of their promo, and in my head, I was like, I could do that better. So I remember during one of my lunch periods, after I'd done some of the reconciliations, I said, do you mind if I just fix that up a little bit for you? And they were like, oh, sure, if you want. And then they ended up bringing me on to do, for the entire year, I got to revamp some of their marketing. Yeah, so I think I've always been subconsciously pushing to do more creative things. And then now it's really focusing and honing in on film. Because through weddings, I was able to realize that I like the ability of, again, telling a story, telling a narrative, being able to bring people into this moment. They get to relive it. And when you're working with film, you know, it's motion picture. And rather than have these stills, you know, you have the audio, you have the visual, you're able to bring people into a completely different world. And I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm biased too because I love film. I
Yeah.
love watching TV a lot. So, JCK, you built it, doing some jobs, and how's it been so far?
Amazing, which I'm so happy that I get to say that. In the beginning, it was difficult when I was doing it solo as Patricia. And another rationale for having, you know, the J and the K was also because the two gentlemen, they're two white men. And the reason why I also felt that it was a benefit to have their assistance with the business and to kind of bring them in the early stages is I fully recognize that I am, you know, a visible minority. I'm also a woman. So being able to, I think, sometimes get the footing that you need in the world that I live in sometimes necessitates having to rely on other people or other methods to be able to kind of advance what it is that I'm trying to do, right? So I try to, again, thinking outside of the box of how I can really, you know, get to the end objective that I want to get to. But working with them and having them also made me realize that working independently is never the same as working with a team, right? So the idea with JCK is that we're a collective of creatives doing what we love to better serve our clients. And so everyone who is a part of the collective, you know, freelancers own their own businesses, we all get to come together and we get to work cohesively to be able to provide different deliverables for our clients. And the idea is that, you know, collaboration over competition has always been my motto. And that's how I'm trying to build the company is everyone has all of these different skill sets and a lot of them are complementary. So when we're working together, now you don't just have Patricia who maybe, you know, can piece it all together from a managerial perspective. But now you have someone who really excels with the cinematography, someone who really excels with the sound, someone who really excels with all of these other aspects. And then you get this beautiful, you know, end result for your client because you're working together. And then also everyone gets a little bit of the pie. So everyone gets to take home a paycheck, which is, which I think is also really nice, right?
Yeah, you know, I love that approach. And like, I have this friends, team of awesome people I work with. I call them the Avengers. You know, it's like the movie because each person is a superhero on their own. But like when they come together, it's like, you know, magic is going to happen. So I totally get the collective thing. And what led you down that path? Like, I mean, you kind of had your business. You're doing what you were doing, but what led you to decide to create this collective?
I think in the beginning, when I was first in Halifax and on social media, I remember sometimes I would see these events of other people in the creative space going to do things together. And it always felt, you know, some of the events, you know, would just be all guys who, you know, in the industry that I am, sometimes it is predominantly male-led, on the film side anyway. And I always remember thinking to myself, this feels like a boys' club that I want to get in on this. So I thought, or I can make my own club and then bring other people into that club. And so it's nice because these people that you know, there was a window when I'm looking out, wanting to be a part of something, I was able to grow something and then invite other people to be a part of that. And so I think for me, it stemmed from wanting to be able to work with like-minded people. When I tell my sisters, you know, oh, look at this lens flare. Oh, look at this scene. Look at that composition. Isn't it great? They don't get the same excitement as somebody who works, you know, in that industry. Or when we're doing graphic design or we're doing websites, oh, look at that cool transition as you're scrolling. Those things they don't cause excitement for people who aren't doing it on a regular basis.
It isn't for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. So wanting to work with like-minded people was my biggest thing. Wanting to be a part of that club, but create the club for myself was a big motivator. And I'm a social person. I just like being able to be around other people.
So you mentioned that your part was consent and domestic violence.
Yes.
Like, what's your experience of that?
So the reason why that is those are the two stories that I get to talk about in my interview. Consent, that's always been something that's been very big for me, because I think sometimes men forget what that line is, right? Having to ask 10 times before you wear her down and she finally says yes isn't the greatest consent to have, right? If it's not an enthusiastic yes, it's not a yes. And so that's something that I've always felt, was something that growing up, or sex education, in school, we're never really, men sometimes are not really taught what's the best way to be able to speak about that. So that was something that I felt strongly about, and I really wanted to be able to drive home what the definition of consent is, again, in a world where sometimes men sometimes overstep on that boundary. And then in regards to domestic violence, that one is particular to my personal upbringing, because in 2011, I did lose my mother to domestic violence. So she lost her life as a direct result of my father's doing. So of course, he subsequently, after that evening, was incarcerated, and I haven't seen him for about 10 years. So I think, at first it was something that I was weary to want to talk about, but I also recognized that I have firsthand experience of what that one event trickled into, right? Because then I was subsequently placed into foster care, as were my sisters. And so much therapy. How do you deal with, I witnessed, my own mother being murdered by my father. And the weapon of choice was a hammer. So it was blunt force trauma to the head, which as a 15-year-old child coming down the stairs and witnessing that, not something that's easy to just kind of move over, right? So I think it's important sometimes, because my parents they were very African, in the sense that some of their values are not equal to that of Western culture. And I say that in the sense of, the patriarchy exists wherever you are. I think it's a man's world that we live in. But in African culture, women going to school, women advancing in their careers is something that's even, the gap is even bigger, right? Your father doesn't expect you to go to university, and my mother was the first person in her whole tribe to get, a university degree. She was really going above and beyond. And so I think it really highlights what, that kind of mindset and that kind of culture of women always being lesser and men feeling like, they need to be at the top. And if they don't get what they want, well, then they have the right to do whatever out of anger, out of whatever the situation may be. Just that mindset is something that we really need to get out of. And so in Western culture, yes, women are, allowed more so to be able to advance their careers, to get an education. It's not something that the gap isn't quite as large compared to Africa, but it still highlights what can happen when that mindset and that belief of women are lesser, what that can result in, right? And so it's an important story, and I think it needs to be talked about just so men can have an understanding of, of course there are going to be marital issues. There are different ways to handle them. And just men in general, sometimes I feel, biologically speaking, and I know there are the exceptions, as the, sometimes stronger, bigger person, it's easier to be the oppressor, right? And so having these sensitive conversations on, okay, how can we talk about mental health? How can we talk about the right way to handle situations? How can we mitigate instances of domestic violence is something that I also feel strongly about, because I have been directly affected. Yeah.
Well, that's powerful. Yeah.
It was a lot.
Yeah. So, obviously the August James Project is going to be a heavy one, I guess. And I know you have a lot of things to do for the rest of your time here, so I'm not going to keep you any much longer. But I want to end it with this question now. You're a Black woman in this industry that is sometimes, but it's one thing that happened in the last couple of years is where people understand that, well, representation is something that's really important. As a kid, when you watch TV and you see someone looking like you doing something cool, it kind of gives you something to look forward to, right? So you're now young black woman running on from producing all this stuff and building things. What do you have to share to that young black person out there watching? It's like, I know I'm putting too much on your shoulder right now, but like, what do you have to share to with them?
I sometimes get asked what my big picture is in the world of film and why I want to work as a producer. And I tell people at the end of the day, I want to be Halifax's and maybe someday Toronto's Shonda Rhimes, right? Showrunner, really being able to tell, a story as well as producing and, all encompassing. A showrunner is what I aspire to be. And I look at Shonda Rhimes, and to me, that's someone that I can say, oh, this is a black woman. This is someone who was able to accomplish something that I'm trying to do. There's hope for me. There's motivation. Okay, I think I can do this. And so I think if anyone's going to look at me, and by all means, I know I'm not perfect. I try to, keep it all together and do the best that I can. And I know that I'm not perfect. But if someone's going to look at me as, a role model or look to me for words of encouragement or what I would want to instill into other people, is definitely that your past doesn't hinder your future. Because again, with my history and being an orphan, and then also being a woman, and then being black, and then being queer, all of these things that should be looked at as disadvantages, take them, own that as your story, and then use that as your fuel and your motivation to be more resilient, to push you more, to make you realize, okay, but if I can overcome this, then, my goodness, I am a superwoman, right? I can do anything that I put my mindset to. So I really just want to show people that, a lot of the times people get stuck on, it's just a dream. It can't happen. But, the harder that you work, the more amazing people you surround yourself with, a good support system, then things can come to fruition. And as long as you realize that, believe in yourself and don't let your past hinder your future, don't let it dictate your future, write that story yourself, pave the path for yourself, is definitely something that I'm hoping my story can highlight, because a lot of negativity has been in my past. Taking that in and changing that energy and bringing it back out into the world as positivity of, okay, let's be better people. Let's talk about the negative, but in a positive light, right? Is really what I would say to kind of give some motivation and inspiration to others kind of looking at my story.
Patricia, thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing your story. Also, all the awesome things you do. I can't wait to see the August James project when it's done.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming to the Blackout podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.